There is a particular kind of silence that happens in hospital rooms. Not the silence of peace. Not the silence of sleep. It's the silence that falls when a grown adult, someone the world has decided is untouchable, suddenly cannot find a single word. You've seen it before. Maybe you've been it before. That moment when something you buried, something you told yourself was gone, walks back through a door you didn't even know was still open. Dr. Ethan Cole had been in that hospital for 11 years. He had walked those corridors 10,000 times. He had delivered impossible news with steady hands and a steadier voice. He had never, not once, dropped his clipboard. Until the night a little girl with wide brown eyes looked up at him from a hospital bed and asked a question so simple, so devastating in its innocence, that the entire room seemed to stop breathing. "Mommy, why is the doctor crying?" He wasn't crying. Not yet. But the clipboard hit the floor. And Ethan Cole, billionaire, surgeon, the man Forbes had called the most composed mind in American medicine, stood perfectly still and felt the ground disappear beneath him. Because the little girl asking the question had his eyes. And so did the other twin sitting beside her. Across the room, a woman he had not seen in 3 years went completely pale. She said one word, not out loud. Just her lips. No. If you have ever lost something, not to accident, not to illness, not to fate, but to a decision someone else made for you, without your knowledge, without your consent, then you already understand what this story is about. But I promise you, you do not yet know how deep it goes. Before we continue, to our new viewers joining us today, subscribe and say hello in the comments. I genuinely enjoy recognizing and welcoming the members of our growing family. Today's warm shout-out goes to Charmaine Campbell from the United States, Emma Kuz from Jamaica, and Ashim from India. Thank you for being part of our family. Subscribe now and comment below so I can welcome you too. Now, let me take you back. Not to the hospital. Not yet. Let me take you back to where this story actually begins. A rainy Thursday in Brooklyn. A woman making lunches for 2 little girls she was raising entirely alone. And a phone call she had stopped expecting 3 years ago. Avery Bennett had learned to do everything with her hands full. Literally. On a Tuesday morning in October, she was holding a juice box between her elbow and her ribs, spreading peanut butter with her right hand, and simultaneously using her left foot to push a backpack closer to the door, all while conducting a full negotiation with a 6-year-old named Lila who had decided, with absolute certainty, that she was not going to wear the pink sneakers today. "The pink ones are too loud," Lila announced. "Shoes don't make noise standing still," Avery said. "They make noise in my heart." Avery paused. Looked at her daughter. Lila, 6 years old, dark-eyed, arms crossed, stared back at her with an expression that was disturbingly familiar. Not familiar the way children resemble their mothers. Familiar the way people resemble someone else entirely. Avery looked away first. She always looked away first. In the second bedroom, they called it the second bedroom though it was barely large enough for a bunk bed and a shared bookshelf, Nora was already dressed, already sitting quietly at the edge of the mattress, her small shoes already tied in perfect double knots. Nora was like that. Where Lila pushed, Nora observed. Where Lila made noise, Nora made space. If Lila was a gust of wind, Nora was the thing that noticed when the wind shifted. Avery leaned in the doorway. "You okay, bug?" Nora looked up. Her eyes, dark, searching, older somehow than 6 years should allow, studied her mother's face. "You didn't sleep," Nora said. "Not a question." "I slept a little," Avery said. "Your coffee is already made," Nora said. "I turned on the machine." Avery stood very still for a moment. 6 years old. She had set the coffee machine. This was Avery's life. Not bad. Not tragic. Not a disaster you'd point to and name. Just full. Heavy in the way that only people carrying everything quietly understand, the particular weight of a life where you've learned not to put anything down because if you do, you might not be able to pick it back up. She worked mornings at a pediatric clinic in Park Slope, not as a doctor, though she'd been 2 semesters away from her nursing degree once, before things changed. She worked the front desk. She was good at it. She remembered every child's name, every parent's worry, every returning patient's favorite color for the paper bracelets. She worked evenings at a copy shop on Atlantic Avenue, Tuesday through Thursday, after the girls were at the neighbors. She did not complain. She did not explain herself to anyone who hadn't earned the explanation. And she had not, in 3 years, spoken the name Ethan Cole out loud to another living person. There were 2 coffee cups on the counter that morning. She only ever used one. The second one was still there from the night before. She'd set it out from habit, just for a moment, and then left it. She did that sometimes. She'd stopped wondering why. She loaded the girls into the car, a 2017 Corolla with a dent in the rear bumper and a Little Mermaid sticker on the dashboard that Lila had applied without permission and Nora had solemnly defended, and she drove them to school. Lila in the pink sneakers. Because in the end, even Lila's heart noise couldn't compete with a mother's look. And on the drive, Nora sat quietly in the back seat and pressed 2 fingers against the car window, watching the raindrops race each other down the glass. She'd been doing that more lately. The quiet. The tired. Avery had noticed, and told herself it was the season change. She told herself a lot of things. What she hadn't told herself, what she had simply refused to name, was the way Nora's lips had been slightly blue on cold mornings. How her daughter sometimes pressed a small fist to her chest when she thought no one was watching. How Avery had booked an appointment with a pediatric cardiologist 2 weeks ago. And then cancelled it. And rebooked it. Tomorrow. The appointment was tomorrow. At Manhattan Mercy Hospital. The hospital Ethan Cole had run for 4 years. She did not know that yet. Or she'd refused to look. I'll let you decide which. The next morning, the fish tank in the cardiology waiting room had a small hand-painted sign that said, "Our fish are very calming. Please do not tap the glass." Lila tapped the glass immediately. Avery pulled her back. Nora sat with her hands folded in her lap, watching the room instead of the fish. Her sneakers didn't reach the floor. Avery had taken both girls, she had no one to leave Lila with, and Lila, being Lila, had declared the hospital interesting, the way she declared everything interesting that alarmed her. The check-in had been fast. The nurse, a young woman with braids and a manner so deliberately soothing it was almost its own kind of alarm, had scanned Nora's intake paperwork and said, "Dr. Cole may be observing today. Is that all right?" Avery had not registered the name. Not yet. She'd said yes. Of course. Fine. She was watching Nora hold very still while her heart rate was taken. The way her daughter accepted the cold of the sensor against her chest without flinching. Without complaining. Just, accepting. 6 years old. She had already learned to accept things without complaining. Avery pressed her thumbnail hard into her palm and breathed. The junior cardiologist's name was Dr. Priya Anand. She was thorough. Careful. She spoke the way good doctors speak to frightened parents, slowly, without jargon, watching eyes instead of charts. She said things like, "possible congenital," and, "we'd like to run a hereditary panel," and, "nothing that requires immediate action tonight." And then she said, "I'd like my senior colleague to take a look. Just to get a second set of eyes. He happens to be in the building." And she stepped out. And the room was quiet for a moment. Lila, seated in the corner with a coloring book she'd produced from her backpack, said, "Is Nora going to be okay?" Nora said, without looking up from her own hands, "I'm right here, Lila. You can ask me." Lila looked at her sister. "Are you going to be okay?" Nora considered this with the seriousness of a much older person. "I think so," she said finally. "But something feels like it's waiting." Avery was going to say something. Something reassuring. Something maternal and certain. The door opened. And everything she'd spent 3 years constructing, the life, the distance, the careful architecture of moving forward, came apart in the space of 4 seconds. Because the man who walked through the door was tall. Dark-haired. With eyes that were dark and searching and older somehow than his years should allow. He was reading a chart. He hadn't looked up yet. And Avery recognized him the way you recognize a song you haven't heard in years, in your body before your brain catches up, the melody arriving somewhere below conscious thought. "Ethan." Her chair scraped back. The sound made him look up. And for one suspended, terrible moment, the chart in his hands, the room behind him, the fish tank in the waiting room, the rain against the window, everything, simply stopped. His eyes moved from her face. To Nora. To Lila. Back to Nora. And something happened in his expression that Avery had never seen on his face before. Not in the year they'd known each other. Not in the night that had changed everything. Not even on the morning she'd walked away from his building and told herself she would not look back. The clipboard slipped. Hit the floor. And Nora, quiet, observant Nora, who noticed everything, looked at her mother, then at the doctor, then at her mother again. And asked. "Mommy, why is the doctor crying?" He wasn't crying yet. But his eyes were. And Avery was already on her feet, already reaching for Nora's hand with fingers that would not stop shaking, already building the wall back up brick by desperate brick. Not here. Not now. Not after 3 years. But Lila, who was always a step behind and a voice ahead, looked at Ethan Cole with her small face perfectly serious and said, "You look like you know us." He did. God help him. He did. But here's what nobody in that room knew yet. This was not a coincidence. There are no coincidences in a story this carefully controlled. Someone had been watching. Someone had been waiting. And the appointment that brought Nora Bennett to Manhattan Mercy Hospital on that rainy Thursday morning, the referral that landed in her file, the specific cardiologist who happened to be in the building, had been arranged. Not by fate. By a person. And that person was about to make the worst miscalculation of their life. Ethan Cole had made decisions worth hundreds of millions of dollars without blinking. He had stood in operating rooms where one wrong movement would have meant a life lost, and his hands had not trembled. He stood in a hospital corridor and could not make himself move in either direction. Dr. Priya Anand found him there 30 seconds later. "Dr. Cole. Give me a moment. The family is, Priya." His voice was quiet. Controlled. The control of a man who has practiced it for so long he's forgotten what it costs. "Give me 1 moment." She gave him 3. Then she said, gently, "She's 6. The child. The one with the cardiac presentation." He already knew. He'd seen the intake form. Bennett, Nora. Age 6. Date of birth, he'd done the math before he'd even walked through the door. He just hadn't believed it yet. "And the other one?" he asked. "Twin sister. Lila. No cardiac indication. She seems." Priya paused. Remarkably unbothered by all of this. Despite everything, something moved in his chest. He straightened. Picked up the chart. Walked back through the door. Avery was standing. She had put herself between the girls and the door, not dramatically, not with her arms out, just positioned. The way a person positions themselves when their body knows before their mind does that they need to protect something. "Miss Bennett," he said. Her chin came up. "Dr. Cole." Her voice was, he'd expected anger. Or fear. Or the particular cool dignity of someone who has rehearsed a moment so many times it's become armor. He got all 3 at once. "I need to examine your daughter," he said. "You don't have to. I'm the senior cardiologist on, I know what you are," she said. Quiet. Final. Nora, sitting on the examination table in her paper gown, looked between them with her dark, ancient eyes. "Mommy," she said. "I want the doctor to look. I don't like how my chest feels." The sentence landed like a stone in still water. Avery closed her eyes for exactly 1 second. Then she stepped aside. Ethan examined Nora with the same steadiness he brought to every patient. Careful. Thorough. His hands did not shake. He asked her questions in a voice calibrated to be calm without being condescending, a tone he'd spent years learning. "Does it feel like fluttering? Or more like a knock?" "Like something's trying to get out," Nora said seriously. "That's a very good description. Lila says I have a dragon in there." Lila might be right. Lila looked up from her coloring book. "I'm always right." Something cracked, almost invisibly, in Ethan's composure. He made a note on the chart. He did not look at Avery. She did not look at him. But in the charged silence between 2 adults who have a history the children in the room don't yet know, both of them felt the same thing. This cannot be the place. Not with the girls here. Not now. "I'm ordering a full hereditary cardiac panel," he said, speaking to Dr. Anand. "And I want the echo results on my desk by 5. Of course." He closed the chart. He looked, finally, directly at Avery. "Are you in the same place?" he asked. She stiffened. What? Your contact information from 3 years ago. Is it current? A pause. The length of a breath. No. Then I'll need your current number. She gave it to him. Formally. The way you'd give your number to a plumber. He wrote it in the chart without expression. He left. The door closed. Lila immediately said, "Why does he have our eyes?" And Avery sat down in the plastic chair and pressed both hands to her face. Now. I need to stop here. Because while Avery was sitting in that chair trying to hold herself together, Ethan Cole was in his office. Not making calls. Not reviewing charts. He was sitting at his desk. Staring at a framed photograph he hadn't touched in 3 years. And the woman in that photograph, not Avery, was smiling. Her name was Vanessa. She was his chief of staff. She had worked beside him for 6 years. She had, on at least 3 occasions, told him she considered him one of the most honorable men she'd ever worked with. And she was the one who had first told him, 3 years ago, that Avery Bennett had simply stopped responding to his messages. That she had moved on. That some people, Vanessa had said gently, are not meant to stay. He had believed her. He had believed her because she had no reason to lie. He was still believing her. For now. The echocardiogram results arrived at 4:47 p.m. Ethan read them the way he read all results, quickly first, for overview. Then slowly, for truth. Then he sat back. The hereditary cardiac marker in Nora's report was rare. Not 1 in 1,000 rare. Rarer. It appeared in fewer than 4% of the population. He knew this because he had seen it exactly once before in his career. In his own file. From his own childhood cardiology report. Age 7. Mild presentation. Managed without intervention. He'd never passed it to a patient's chart or a medical school lecture. It was personal, filed years ago, largely forgotten except as a footnote in his own history. He set down the results. He was very still. He already knew, on some cellular level, what the panel would confirm. What he didn't know yet, what he couldn't have known sitting in his office at 4:52 on a Thursday afternoon, was that Avery had written him a letter. Not one letter. Many letters. And that every single one of them had arrived at this building. And none of them had ever reached him. That evening in Avery's apartment, the girls were in bed. Avery was at the kitchen table with a cup of tea she hadn't drunk, staring at nothing. She had known, intellectually, geographically, that Ethan Cole ran Manhattan Mercy. She had chosen the hospital anyway. She had told herself it was the best facility. She had told herself Nora deserved the best facility. She had told herself a lot of things. The truth, which she examined now in the quiet of her kitchen, was simpler and more complicated at once. She had needed him to see them. She hadn't admitted that to herself until the moment the door opened and he was standing there. But some part of her, the part that had carried those letters for 6 years, the part that had set out 2 coffee cups this morning without thinking, had brought her daughters to that hospital on purpose. Not for confrontation. Not for answers. Just to be seen. Her phone buzzed. A number she didn't recognize. Manhattan area code. She answered. Ms. Bennett. His voice. Unchanged. Low and careful. I need to speak with you. Not about the results. Those are serious but manageable. I need to speak with you about something else. Silence. Avery. It was the first time he'd said her name. Just that. Her name. And she felt 3 years compress into a single breath. I'll come to the hospital, she said. No. Not the hospital. A pause. Will you meet me somewhere? Somewhere, outside of all of this. She should have said no. She should have kept the distance. She'd spent 3 years building the distance. Tomorrow morning, she said. 8 o'clock. The coffee place on Dean Street. You won't know it. I'll find it. She hung up. And in the kitchen quiet, she noticed the second coffee cup still on the counter. She finally put it away. He was already there when she arrived. He had found it. She noticed he'd ordered just water, as if he hadn't trusted himself to be casual about coffee. She ordered a black coffee and sat across from him. They looked at each other. 6 years of history. 1 year of something that had no name then and still didn't. 3 years of silence. And the particular silence now of two people who have something enormous to say and don't know which sentence to start with. He started. The hereditary marker in Nora's panel, I know, she said. You know. I'm not an idiot, Ethan. I never, he stopped. Recalibrated. I know you're not. She wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. The girls are healthy, she said. Overall. The cardiologist I saw last year, not here, said it was a mild presentation. Monitorable. She said if I could provide the paternal history, she stopped. You could have contacted me, he said. Medically. For the history. Her expression shifted. Just slightly. Is that what you think I should have done? I think, he paused. I think there's a version of the last 3 years that I don't have. And I need to understand what it looks like. She studied him. Something in his face, the openness of it, the lack of the composure she remembered like a wall, made her sit back. You didn't know, she said. Not a question. Know what? She looked at him for a long moment. That I was pregnant. The coffee shop was quiet around them. A barista called out an order name. Someone's phone buzzed on another table. Ethan Cole did not move. What did you say? I was pregnant, she said. I found out 6 weeks after that night. I tried to reach you. Your assistant said you were unavailable. I left messages. 3 of them. I know you didn't. Her voice was even. She had prepared this. She had rehearsed this composure for 3 years without knowing she was rehearsing it. I know that now. I didn't know it then. He was gripping the edge of the table. What did they tell you? Your assistant called me back. A woman named Vanessa. She was very kind, actually. Very professional. A pause. She told me you'd reviewed my messages and that you appreciated my honesty, but that you had decided the situation was not something you were in a position to pursue. And that it would be best for everyone if I didn't contact the office again. She told you, he stopped. Started again. She said she spoke as your representative, Avery said. I had no reason to doubt her. The silence that followed was the particular silence of a person realizing that a room they thought they knew has an entirely different floor plan. He said, very quietly, I need you to know something. Ethan, I need you to hear me say it. His voice was not steady anymore. I never received those messages. I never reviewed them. I never said any of that. I didn't know you were pregnant. I didn't know, he stopped. I didn't know about the girls. Avery looked at him. She had told herself, in the preparation for this moment, that she would not know whether to believe him. She believed him. She believed him completely and immediately, and she hated how easily she did it. Okay, she said. Okay. Okay meaning I believe you, she said. Not okay meaning it doesn't matter. He nodded slowly. It matters. Yes, she said. It does. And then his phone rang. He looked at the screen. His jaw tightened. He rejected the call. It rang again immediately. You need to take that, Avery said. I don't, Ethan. She looked at the screen over his arm. The name on the screen was, Mom. Take it. He stood. Stepped away. Answered. Avery watched his back. Watched the way his shoulders, which had just, for the first time in this conversation, dropped slightly from his ears, climbed back up in the span of 10 seconds. He came back. Sat down. Something had closed in his expression. I have to get to the hospital, he said. Of course. This isn't finished. No, she said. It's not. He left money on the table, too much, the way people do when their mind is elsewhere. Avery sat alone. Finished her coffee. Watched the door. And thought, something just happened. Not between them. Something else. Something from that phone call. She didn't know what. Not yet. What happened next, I want you to really sit with this, because it changes everything you think you know about who the villain of this story is. When Ethan arrived at the hospital, his mother was already in his office. Margaret Cole. 71 years old. Immaculate in a cream blouse and pearls. She had founded the Cole Foundation. She had endowed 3 hospital wings. She had, by any public measure, spent her life in service to others. She stood when he entered. "Ethan," she said. "I heard you were seen with a woman in Brooklyn this morning." He stopped. "I beg your pardon." "A woman named Avery Bennett." She said the name without hesitation. Without surprise. "And before you ask, yes. I know who she is." "How long have you known?" he asked. Margaret Cole sat. Not like a person caught. Like a person who has been waiting for a specific conversation and has prepared accordingly. "Since before the girls were born," she said. The room went completely still. "She contacted your office," Ethan said. Each word careful. "Separated." "She did." "And we managed it," Margaret said. "We protected you. We protected this hospital. You were 18 months from the Harrington merger, Ethan. Do you understand what would have happened if, she wrote to me?" His voice was not raised. It was lower than usual. "She wrote to tell me she was pregnant. And you managed it. I protected this family's, those girls are this family." He turned to the window. "Those children. They are 6 years old. And they have grown up without," he stopped. "Avery raised them alone. She worked 2 jobs. She raised my daughters alone. Because you decided that a hospital merger was worth more than my children." Margaret's composure did not break. That was, somehow, the worst part. "The situation was complicated. I want to know everything," he said. "Every letter. Every call. Every decision that was made. I want every document. Ethan, every document." She looked at him. And for the first time in his memory, for the first time in 41 years of being Margaret Cole's son, she looked, just slightly, unsure. He stood at the window for a long time after she left. Below, the city moved. Taxis. Pedestrians. The ordinary machinery of 10 million lives. Somewhere in Brooklyn, 2 little girls with his eyes were either in school or at home with a mother who had spent 3 years building a life out of the wreckage of a decision that had never been hers to make. One specific detail surfaced. He thought, Vanessa. Vanessa, who had been his chief of staff for 6 years. Vanessa, who managed his calendar, his correspondence, his office communication. Vanessa, who had told him, gently, 3 years ago, that Avery had simply moved on. Vanessa, who had said, "Some people are not meant to stay." He picked up his phone. He called the records department. He said, "I need to see all correspondence received by this office, paper and digital, from an Avery Bennett. Any date, any format." A pause. "Dr. Cole, that would require, I know what it requires," he said. "Do it." And somewhere in the building, in a file room on the 4th floor, in a locked cabinet behind a frosted glass door, 7 letters written on ordinary paper, in a woman's handwriting, waited to be found. If you've ever had someone make a decision about your life without asking you, if you've ever discovered that a door you thought was closed was actually locked from the outside, then you know exactly what Ethan Cole felt standing at that window. Subscribe to this channel. Because the people who find these stories, they're the ones who understand them. And the next time you come back, I want to recognize your name in the comments. Leave your name and your city. That's all. I'll find you. The records came to him in 3 stages. First, digital correspondence, scrubbed from the system but recoverable by the IT forensics team he called in a favor from at 9 p.m. on a Thursday night. A man who owed him something from a decade ago and didn't ask questions. Second, a physical file, flagged, resolved, filed in an administrative cabinet under a code that meant sender deceased or disengaged. As if Avery had simply stopped existing. Third, Vanessa. He didn't call her immediately. He read everything first. The first letter was dated 7 weeks after the night he'd been trying not to think about for 3 years. Avery's handwriting was small and deliberate, the handwriting of someone who had learned early that space was limited and words needed to count. "I don't know if this is the right thing to do. I don't know if you want to hear from me. But I think you deserve to know, and I think I would regret it forever if I said nothing. I'm pregnant. I haven't decided anything yet. I'm not asking you to decide anything. I'm just telling you. Because it seemed like the kind of thing a person should know. You can call me back or you don't have to. I understand either way. He read it 3 times. Then the second letter. Written 4 months later. I've decided to keep them. I say them because it's twins, which the ultrasound confirmed last week. I don't know if that changes anything for you. I'm writing because I said I would keep writing until I heard something back. Your office called. A woman named Vanessa. She was very kind. She said you'd asked her to reach out on your behalf and that you wished me well but that you wouldn't be able to be involved. I'm choosing to believe there's a version of you that didn't mean that the way it sounds. But if that is what you mean, then I understand. And I won't write again. She had written again. 5 more letters, each one shorter than the last. Each one a little more careful. A little more closed. The last letter was dated 3 years ago, 4 days after the girls were born. It was 3 sentences. Their names are Nora and Lila. They are healthy. Nora has your eyes. That was all. No address. No demands. No anger. Just 3 sentences. And a fact. Nora has your eyes. Ethan Cole sat at his kitchen table at midnight and did not look like the man Forbes had profiled 6 months ago. He did not look like a CEO or a surgeon or someone who had built anything worth having. He looked like a man reading letters from a life he had been prevented from living. The next morning, Vanessa arrived for work as usual. She did not yet know what had happened. Vanessa Chen was 44 years old. She had worked for Ethan Cole since before he was famous for anything except being good at his job. She was organized and precise and loyal in the way that people who organize other people's lives become loyal, personally, sometimes too personally, to the structure they've built around someone. She knocked on his office door at 8:15 a.m. as she always did. Morning. You have the board briefing at, close the door, he said. She closed it. She looked at the table. At the letters arranged there in chronological order. And Vanessa Chen, who had never in 6 years dropped her composure in front of him, went very still. I can explain, she said. I know you can, he said. I'm not sure you should start with that sentence. She sat. Because her legs had apparently decided to stop cooperating. Your mother, she began. My mother asked you to intercept communications from Avery Bennett. She said it was temporary. Until the merger, and then? Silence. And then she said the situation had resolved itself. That the woman had moved on. That there was no reason to, the situation, he said quietly, was my daughter's. Vanessa's face changed. Whatever professional composure she'd trained herself into over 6 years simply, left. What remained was the face of a person who has known they did something wrong for a very long time and has been waiting in dread for the conversation that makes it undeniable. I thought, she started. I know what you thought, he said. And I need you to understand something. He was very still. You were not protecting me. You were taking something from me. From 3 people. My daughters grew up without a father because everyone in this office decided that was an acceptable cost. And it was not acceptable. It was not your call to make. It was not my mother's call to make. A long pause. I'm not firing you today, he said. But I need you to give me every communication. Every instruction from my mother's office. Every document. And then you and I will have a separate conversation about what happens next. She nodded. She was crying. He noticed. He didn't look away. I'm sorry, she said. I know, he said. She left. He sat alone. And for the first time since this began, he let himself think about the one thing he'd been circling around since that hospital room, since the clipboard hit the floor, since the little girl with his eyes asked why the doctor looked scared. What do you say to your daughters? When you've missed 3 years that were not your choice but that were also not theirs? What do you say to a woman who wrote you 7 letters and received nothing back but silence dressed up as kindness? He didn't have an answer. But he had the letters. And he had tomorrow. Now, here's where I need to slow down. Because I want you to think about Margaret Cole for a moment. Not with anger. Not yet. She was not a villain in a cape. She was a woman who had built something, a hospital, a foundation, a family name that had come to mean something in this city, and who had spent her entire life making decisions designed to protect it. She had protected it the way powerful people protect things. By deciding who was allowed inside. By deciding what counted. By deciding, with the complete certainty of someone who has never had to justify herself, that a frightened young woman's letters were a problem to be managed rather than a human being to be answered. She had looked at Avery Bennett and seen a liability. And I want you to really sit with that. Because the truth is, Margaret Cole believed she had done the right thing. She had done it without losing sleep. And that is what made her dangerous. Not malice. Certainty. Do you remember the second coffee cup? The one on Avery's counter. The one she'd set out from habit and left there. I told you she'd stopped wondering why she did it. That wasn't quite true. She knew why. On the morning she'd gotten a call from Ethan's office, Vanessa's careful, professional call, she had been standing in her kitchen with 2 cups out, habit from the handful of mornings he'd stayed, the handful of mornings that had felt like a different kind of future. And she'd put 1 cup away. And kept making the coffee. And for 3 years, not every day. Some days. The harder days, she'd set out 2 cups. Not because she was waiting. Because some habits are the last honest thing in a person. She told me, later, when I spoke with her, that she always put the second cup away before the girls woke up. She didn't want them asking questions she didn't have answers to. Marcus Webb had lived in the apartment above Avery for 4 years. He was 53, a former social worker, a man who made excellent jollof rice and had strong opinions about people who didn't return borrowed umbrellas. He was, in every meaningful sense, the closest thing Avery had to a support system. He was also the person who, 3 years ago, had urged her not to write the last letter. Leave it, he'd said. You've said what needed saying. You can't make him choose to be present. You can only choose what you're going to do with your life. She'd written the letter anyway. And he'd said nothing more about it. Now, sitting across from him in his kitchen at 10 p.m. on a Friday, the girls asleep downstairs, she told him everything. The hospital. The examination. The clipboard hitting the floor. Ethan's face. The coffee shop. What he'd said about the letters. Marcus listened. He was good at that. When she finished, he said, "And you believe him?" "Yes." "Why?" She thought about it. Genuinely. Because he looked like a person who had just been handed a loss he didn't know he'd been carrying. Marcus turned his coffee cup in his hands. "Then what?" "Then I don't know," she said. "Avery." He looked at her. "The girls are 6. They're old enough to ask questions. They're also young enough that whatever happens now, it shapes them for a very long time. So I need you to think clearly." A pause. "What do you want?" She opened her mouth. Closed it. This was the question she had not let herself ask. Because for 3 years, what she wanted had been irrelevant. What mattered was what the girls needed. What mattered was the next shift, the next bill, the next parent-teacher conference. Wanting things, specific things for herself, felt like a luxury she'd quietly given up without noticing. "I don't know," she said finally. Marcus nodded. "That's honest," he said. "That's a good place to start." "He's going to want to be in their lives," Avery said. "Yes. He has resources I don't. Legal standing I don't. A team of people who," she stopped. "What if he tries to take them?" Marcus was quiet for a moment. "Is that what you think he would do?" She didn't answer immediately. "No," she said finally. "But I've been wrong before about what men in power decide they're entitled to." She hadn't meant it as an accusation. She meant it as a fact. Marcus heard both. "Then you need your own counsel," he said. "Before this goes further. Before you have another conversation with him. You need someone in your corner who is only looking out for you and those girls." She nodded. She knew he was right. And she would take his advice. She would. But not before she did one thing first. On Saturday morning, Avery drove to the hospital. Not to the main entrance. She drove around to the side, the administrative entrance, the one she'd researched at 1 a.m. the night before. She sat in the parking lot for a while. Then she went in. She asked at the desk for the administrative records office. She was told it was closed on weekends. She said, "I was told there may be documentation here that pertains to my daughters. Their medical records. And their family history. I'd like to understand what information this institution has on file about them." The receptionist called a supervisor. The supervisor came down. And the supervisor, a young man who was clearly several years too junior for whatever was about to happen to him, brought Avery Bennett to a waiting room. And went to find a manager. And while she waited, she noticed a security monitor on the wall, showing the lobby. And on the security monitor, on the footage that looped, apparently, from the current camera alongside archived footage in some kind of demonstration mode, she saw herself. 3 years ago. Standing in this lobby. Visibly pregnant. Crying, quietly, in the way she always cried, without dramatics, without spectacle, just tears moving down her face while her expression remained composed. And a security guard, a different one from the one on duty now, a man she didn't recognize, approaching her. And speaking to her. She couldn't hear the audio from where she sat. But she could read his lips. She'd been a lip reader as a child, a skill developed out of necessity in a too-loud household. The guard on the screen said, clearly and unmistakably, "Miss, we were told Dr. Cole doesn't know you." Avery sat very still. Then she took out her phone. And filmed the screen. Every second of it. "You remember what I told you earlier? The thing that seemed trustworthy. Vanessa Chen. Loyal. Professional. Kind. Very kind," Avery had said in the coffee shop, describing the woman who had called her on Ethan's behalf. Very kind is what people say about someone when the cruelty arrived wrapped in a pleasant voice. What Avery had not known, what Ethan had not known, what even the hospital board did not fully know, was that Vanessa Chen had not simply relayed Margaret Cole's instructions. The records that came back from the IT forensics team told a more specific story. Vanessa had drafted responses in Ethan's name. Letters, sent from his official stationery. Emails, sent from an address that mirrored his but was slightly different, a period here, an underscore there, the kind of difference you don't catch unless you're looking for it. She had built, over the course of 6 months, a complete correspondence between Ethan Cole and Avery Bennett, except Ethan had been on neither end of it. She had written as him. And she had written as Avery. Responses she drafted and then filed away, creating a paper record of an exchange that had never happened. A relationship that had been cleanly, professionally, documented as resolved. When the forensics team brought this to Ethan, he sat with it for 40 minutes before he said anything. Then he said, "Did she do this alone?" The forensics lead said, "The instructions originated from an external communication. Your mother's personal email. Vanessa implemented. But the blueprint came from outside. My mother told her to write as me. The instruction was to manage the situation using whatever discretion is necessary. We can't know precisely what that meant to, I know what it meant," Ethan said. He had known, on some level, since his mother sat across from him in his office. But knowing a thing abstractly and seeing it in the specific, in the font of a letter drafted in your name, in the signature copied carefully from your actual correspondence, are two entirely different experiences. One is understanding. The other is grief. He sat with the grief for exactly 40 minutes. Then he called his lawyer. "I want to stop here. Because there's one more thing. Something smaller than what you just heard. But in some ways cutting deeper." When the forensic team was cataloging Vanessa's files, the drafts, the fake correspondence, the management documents, they found something in a separate folder. Labeled with a date. 3 years ago. It was a photograph. Printed from what appeared to be a phone screen. A photograph of Nora and Lila. Infant photographs. The kind you might find on a public social media post, or a community forum. Avery had posted a few in those first careful weeks, before she made everything private. Vanessa had printed those photographs. And filed them. In a folder. Labeled managed. She had seen those babies. She had known what she was protecting and from whom. And she had filed them. I don't have a word for that. I've been telling stories for a long time, and I don't have a word for what it is to see a picture of a person's newborn children and file them under managed. Maybe you do. Leave it in the comments. Because I think some of you have met this kind of person in your own lives. The ones who are kind to your face while making decisions about your existence behind a closed door. Margaret Cole lived in a townhouse on the Upper East Side that had been in the family for 40 years. It smelled of fresh flowers and old money and the particular cleanliness of spaces maintained by people who are paid to maintain them. Ethan arrived without calling ahead. She was in the sitting room. She looked up when he entered. She did not look surprised. She looked prepared. As if she had known this conversation was coming and had decided exactly how she would move through it. "Ethan," she said. "You wrote as me," he said. She did not deny it. "You had Vanessa construct letters in my name. Telling a woman carrying my children that I wanted nothing to do with her. In my name. To protect, stop." His voice was not loud. "It didn't need to be. I need you to stop using that word. Because I've been sitting with those letters for 2 days and I cannot find a version of protection anywhere in them." Margaret Cole looked at her son. And for the first time in this story, for the first time in 41 years, perhaps, the certainty in her face showed its first crack. Not guilt. Not remorse. But something older and more private. Fear. Not of consequence. Of being seen clearly by her son. "I had no idea," she said, "that Vanessa would go as far as she did. The forged correspondence, that was beyond, but not the interception," he said. "Not the instruction to manage it." A silence. "No," she said finally. "Not that." Ethan stood in his mother's sitting room for a moment. Then he said the thing he'd been rehearsing since the parking lot. "You are going to meet them." She was quiet. "You are going to sit across from 2 6-year-old girls who have your nose and their father's eyes, and you are going to understand what you cost them. Not in a boardroom. Not in a legal settlement. In a room. Face to face." Margaret Cole looked at her hands. "And after that," he said, "what happens next is between you and them and the rest of your life." He left. The door closed. The townhouse was quiet again. He stood on the sidewalk outside his mother's house. Traffic moved. A woman walked a dog. 2 children on a bike went past, one of them calling something to the other and laughing. His phone was in his hand. Avery's number on the screen. He had, in the last 48 hours, gathered enough documentation to take this matter to the hospital board, to the press, to a family court, to every institution that could force accountability on the people who had done this. He had the letters. He had the forged correspondence. He had the security footage. Avery had sent him the video from her phone with 3 words of text, "I found this." He could make this public. He could burn down every carefully protected structure his mother had spent her life building. He could ensure that no one, not the board, not the press, not the city that had elevated the Cole name for 40 years, could pretend this hadn't happened. Or he could pick up the phone and call Avery. And ask her what she wanted to happen next. Because it was her story. It had always been her story. He had just been kept out of it. He pressed call. Her voice answered. The background noise of children, Lila saying something indistinct, the sound of something being spilled, Nora saying, calmly, "I'll get it." Avery. Ethan. A pause. The sound of a door closing. She was moving away from the girls. "I saw the footage," he said. "I know. I have the letters. All 7. And the forged correspondence." A longer pause. "What are you going to do with it?" she asked. And there it was. The question that contained 100 others. "Are you going to use this to take them from me? Are you going to use this to protect yourself and call it justice? Are you going to make decisions about my life and my daughter's lives and present me with the outcome, the way everyone else has?" He understood what she was asking. "Nothing," he said, "that you don't want done." The silence stretched. "I want an apology," she said finally. "Not from a lawyer. Not in a statement. From the people who did this. To me. And eventually, at the right time, in the right way, to the girls. Yes. I want Nora's care managed by the best team in the city. Without it costing me anything. Not as a gift. As a correction. Yes. And I want," she stopped. The sound of Lila's voice in the background again. "Something about a dragon." "What do you want?" he asked. A pause. "I want you to not be a stranger to them," she said. "I don't know what that looks like yet. I don't know how fast or how slow. But they deserve to know who they are. And you deserve," she stopped again. "Say it," he said. "You deserve the chance you didn't get," she said quietly. "I'm angry. I'm going to be angry for a while. But I'm not going to let my anger take something from those girls." "Thank you," he said. "Don't thank me yet," she said. There's a lot of work ahead. I know. Ethan. Yeah. Don't drop the clipboard again. It scared Nora. A pause. Then, almost inaudible, something that in another man might have been a laugh, or its immediate predecessor. I'll work on it, he said. The hospital board meeting was not dramatic. It was methodical. Ethan laid the documentation in front of 11 people who had approved the merger 3 years ago and watched their faces change in sequence as the picture became clear. Margaret Cole did not attend. But her legal team was there. And they were, for perhaps the first time in a very long time, quiet. The board's response took 2 weeks. Vanessa's employment was terminated with a settlement agreement. The legal team that had drafted the original resolution, the formal word for the decision to silence Avery, was removed from retainer. Nora Bennett was enrolled in a comprehensive cardiac monitoring program at Manhattan Mercy, all costs covered by the hospital under a medical ethics reparation clause that Ethan himself had drafted. The Cole Foundation issued a public statement. 3 paragraphs. The first said that the foundation had become aware of institutional failures in its affiliated hospital that had resulted in harm to a patient's family. The second said that specific corrective measures were being implemented. The third paragraph was the one Ethan had insisted on and his mother's legal team had tried twice to remove. We acknowledge that decisions made to protect institutional interests cause direct and lasting harm to individuals who deserved better from this institution. We are sorry. 8 words. Not enough. A beginning. It was a Sunday. A park near the hospital, not Avery's neighborhood, not Ethan's office, somewhere neutral that Avery had chosen. Margaret Cole arrived in a car that cost more than Avery's annual salary. She was wearing pearls, as always. She stood at the park entrance and looked at the 2 little girls sitting on a bench across the grass, swinging their legs, arguing about something with the focused seriousness of people who take their arguments very seriously. Avery stood nearby. She did not make it easy. She didn't need to make it easy. Margaret walked across the grass. She stood in front of the girls. Lila looked up immediately, with the direct, assessing gaze that was entirely her own. You have Daddy's nose, Lila announced. Margaret blinked. He said the same thing about us, Nora added, without looking up from the book she was reading. Something moved across Margaret Cole's face. Avery watched from a distance. She would describe it later to Marcus as the expression of a woman realizing, for the first time, that power is not the same thing as permanence. That the things you spend your life protecting can outlive your ability to protect them. That 2 small girls with your family's nose and another woman's composure are looking at you from a park bench, and they don't need anything from you. They're already whole. Whatever they had been denied, they had also made. With their mother. In Brooklyn. In a small apartment with a Little Mermaid sticker on the dashboard and a neighbor who made jollof rice and a mother who set 2 coffee cups out on hard mornings. Margaret Cole sat on the bench beside Nora. Nora moved over to give her room. Not because she was told to. Just because she had her father's eyes and her mother's grace. My name is Nora, she said. I know, Margaret said. What's your name? A pause. Margaret, she said. You can call me Margaret. Nora nodded. Returned to her book. And Margaret Cole sat on a park bench in the October sun and looked at her granddaughter's profile and said nothing. And did not move for a very long time. Now I want to take you back. To the operating room. Because this is where the story became real for Ethan in a way that no boardroom or legal document or confrontation with his mother could achieve. Nora's condition had stabilized with medication, but the surgical team agreed that a procedure was necessary, low risk, relatively routine in the scope of pediatric cardiology, but her heart all the same. The night before the surgery, Ethan came to her room. Avery was there. She stood when he entered. Not as a barrier this time. Just, present. Nora was awake. She had a book open but wasn't reading it. Are you scared? Ethan asked. Yes, she said. No hesitation. That's good, he said. Being scared means you understand what's happening. It means you're paying attention. Nora considered this. Lila says only people without imagination aren't scared. Lila is correct. Nora looked at him for a long moment. Will you be there? In the operating room? Ethan glanced at Avery. Avery gave a small, single nod. Yes, he said. I'll be there. Okay. Nora settled back slightly. One more thing. What? When I wake up, will you still be here? Not just in the hospital. Here. The word here was so specific. So precisely chosen by a 6-year-old who had been watching adults move in and out of permanence her entire life. Ethan felt the weight of it. I will be here, he said, for every day I missed. Nora looked at him with those dark, measuring eyes. Decided. Okay, she said. And opened her book. The surgery took 4 hours. Nora woke up and the first thing she said was, did it work? And the second thing she said was, is everyone still here? Everyone was still there. 4 months after the surgery. A Saturday. The park that had become theirs, not anyone's specific territory, but the one they'd returned to often enough that it had accumulated meaning the way places do when people keep choosing them. Avery sat on a bench in the autumn light. She was watching the girls. Ethan sat beside her. Not close. Not far. Just present. The girls were ahead on the path, Lila running with the specific urgency of a child who has decided that this particular moment requires maximum speed, Nora moving more carefully, watching the leaves on the ground with the focused attention she gave everything. They were not a fixed family. Not a finished story. There was still anger, some days, Avery's, which was fair, and which she was working through in ways that were honest and unglamorous and slow. There were still legal documents. Still conversations still ahead with the girls about what all of this had been. Ethan's relationship with his mother was not repaired. It was, suspended. Careful. Beginning, maybe, in the way that things begin when the damage was real but the intention to repair is also real and both of those things have to be true at the same time. He showed up. Every visit, he showed up. He learned that Lila liked her eggs scrambled and her toast unbuttered and her orange juice not too cold. He learned that Nora's favorite author was E.B. White and that she could explain the plot of Charlotte's Web with a nuance that impressed her teachers. He learned that they were afraid of different things, Lila of nothing external, Nora of things too internal to name, and that they needed different approaches and different rooms and that Avery knew all of this so completely it had become part of her breathing. He was learning. It was work. He was grateful for the work. Nora found a red leaf and held it up for inspection. Then she turned and looked back at the bench. At her father. She waved, a small, precise wave, very Nora. He raised his hand. Then Lila, ahead on the path, turned back and yelled, Daddy. Hurry up. We found the good part. Ethan sat still for 1 second. Just one. Avery glanced at him. She saw his face. She looked back at the girls. Then he stood up. And walked forward. Not perfect. Not fully forgiven. But present. I want to ask you something. Not about the ending. About the moment in the coffee shop. When Avery told him she believed him, immediately, completely, against everything she had every reason to feel. She said, I believe you. And then she said, that doesn't mean it doesn't matter. And I keep thinking about that. Because there's a version of that moment where she holds the doubt like a shield. Where she protects herself with skepticism, with the very reasonable armor that 3 years of carrying everything alone earns you. She put it down. Not because it was easy. Because she decided, in that moment, with a coffee she hadn't touched, that her daughters deserved a father who was given the chance to be one. That her own justified anger was real. And that it could exist at the same time as something larger. I've been sitting with that. I wonder if you have too. There's a story coming next that begins very differently. A woman receives a letter at her daughter's wedding. The return address is a name she hasn't spoken in 30 years. A man who, as far as anyone knew, was dead. She opens it in the bathroom of the reception hall, alone, in her mother of the bride dress. Inside, a photograph. Of her. From 30 years ago. And on the back, in handwriting she still recognizes, 4 words. I never stopped looking. That story is next. If this story found you at the right moment, you'll want to be here for it. Subscribe. And if you've never commented before, this is your moment. Tell me, what did Avery do in that coffee shop that most people wouldn't have? I read every comment. I'll see you in the next one.